Now, if you think of a concept like critical thinking, it's a very old idea. There used to be a lot of different names for this kind of a concept, but the terminology critical thinking, I think, came out in the 1940s or sometime like that. The question is, why today? Why is it important as a way to evolve? Why today for children one can understand? Why today for adults of our experience and our kind of educational background? Why today is because there are certain traps which we are knowingly or unknowingly getting into in an information surplus world, right? Gone are the times where one could go to a library and find a book, and in that book there will be some amount of written knowledge, and we can read that, we can trust it to be truth, and then that adds to our knowledge. That's not the way we look at things anymore. We hardly go to a library, but you ask on any subject. It can be as weird a subject as saying that how many books are there with odd number of pages or something like that. You will still get 1,000 hits. That's the kind of information which is available to us. So critical thinking has moved quite profoundly from seeking knowledge to finding out what kind of knowledge to really look at, what kind of information to trust, what kind of traps which we get into as far as our mind is concerned, and how do we reshape and rethink when it comes to information and knowledge. That's really what critical thinking is all about in an information surplus world. Now, these are the things we have done. We're kind of getting to the business end of things as far as Enrich program is concerned. We just have 3 more, trust, empathy, and teamwork, communication, and finally a wrap-up session where we will try and connect all the 12 sessions or the 11 sessions preceding that, including the pre-launch, which will be the 12th session, and then we will wrap it up on the 24th of April. Okay. Now, this is a report. Okay. I'm not saying that one needs to trust this report 100%, but this is an absolutely staggering number. And it's from a fairly reliable agency, Institute for the Future, and a panel of 20 tech, business, and academics who came together and published a report which says 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't yet been invented. So we are thinking we are getting into this new age of machine learning and artificial intelligence and electric cars and cloud computing and so on and so forth. But in 2030, the kind of jobs with which the children of today will be going and doing the jobs, we don't even know. They have not even been invented yet. Now, it's very difficult for us to believe anything like this. The only way we can create our imagination is to rewind 10 years and look at what was life like 10 years back. Apple 10 came out a year and a half back. So we didn't have a smartphone. Apple was the first one to come out with a smartphone. If we had to find out where to go, we had to take out a physical map and look at where to go. We didn't have Google Maps. If COVID had happened in 2010, there is no way we would have imparted education to our children because Zoom was not there 10 years back. We had to go out to a market to buy stuff. We still do, but there was no Amazon, there was no big basket. And we had to do taxi booking, which is far more painful than having an Ola or Uber. Right? This was 2010, not a long time back, just 10 years back. Therefore, in 2030, 2020, which is today, or 21, will look exactly like what 2010 looked like. And we can't even imagine what 2010 looked like. Forget 2000 and 1990s, where there was not even a proper internet in 1990s. except for a few academics who had access to internet at that point in time. All right. Our argument or appeal is 5 things will probably not go out of fashion ever. One of them is how to think critically. When we are posed with a certain problem, how do we go about it logically, rationally, critically, and get on to a certain kind of an answer to the problem we are trying to solve? The second one, which is unlikely to go out of fashion, is creativity, then self-confidence, and finally, our ability to express our ideas, communication, and that important realization, the sum of the parts is always lesser than the whole, and therefore collaboration. Right? So these 5 things are very unlikely to go out of fashion, and we need to be spending some time on each of these 5 and try and see what is that we will do for the 2020s when it comes to these 5 things. We won't be doing all 5 in Enrich. We will do critical thinking. We will do some bit of communication and collaboration. Creativity and confidence is something which we will talk about in a later session. Now, for a quick definition of what critical thinking is, all of us know this definition, which is exercising our cognitive function to really understand what the problem is, to be able to collect the relevant data which are there to solve that particular problem, to be able to analyze how to analyze the problem, different forms of analysis, to be able to analyze them, and finally come out with some kind of a view, some kind of an opinion or a conclusion or an answer to that particular problem in as impartial a manner as possible. Now, this is the definition of critical thinking. It's much easier said than done, even more so now. So why now is because of this. We've always thought of critical thinking as saying, okay, let's start with what is the data we have. We have to collect data. We can spend 1 hour just on this one slide, the top half of this particular slide, which is going from data to analysis to conclusion. In data, there are many different things which are there in data. What kind of data to collect? How to collect a certain kind of data? How do we do sampling? And so on and so forth. After we have collected the data, the analysis. What kind of analysis works for this kind of a data? Then finally, we come to a certain conclusion. Now, this is a very clearly a higher center activity because it calls for analysis. It calls for an unbiased way of looking at data, analyzing and coming to a conclusion, which is very clearly a higher center activity. And therefore, it's about healthy exercising of our cognitive ability. Well, sometimes when we are collecting data, when we put out a hypothesis, there is a certain amount of temptation to want to have a certain kind of conclusion, which is something which we had as a hunch to begin with. But as long as we go through the rigor of carefully analyzing the data, even if the conclusion doesn't fulfill or doesn't satisfy us, and the conclusion is different from what our hunch was, we have to accept it as a scientist or a teacher or a fairly rational person. But we don't do this anymore. In an information overloaded world, what happens is this entire loop is reversed. This entire process is reversed. What we do is we start with a conclusion. We start with a conclusion saying that this person is responsible for the economic problems a country might face. We start with a conclusion saying that this is the reason something is happening in a certain way. We start with all kinds of conclusions. These conclusions are not backed by data. We haven't done the analysis, but we have a conclusion. Why? Because we repeatedly read that in social media, whether it is WhatsApp or Twitter, or we have 24/7 news channels, not just news channels, they call themselves news channels, but most of the time it's about so-called analysts coming and talking on these news channels, or experts coming and talking on these news channels. We don't know whether they are experts, whether they have carefully looked at the data, analyzed the data and come to a conclusion, or they're coming with a certain agenda, which starts really with a conclusion first, and later, because we have plenty of information which is available, we can always take some data and fit it and say, see, this is what I told you. This is what the conclusion is all about. What happens is there is a stealthy entry of a certain amount of cognitive laziness and inflexibility when this happens. What is cognitive laziness? It's the exact opposite of what we do in the first step, which is actually exercising our cognitive ability to collect data, analyze the data, and come to a conclusion. We don't do that anymore. We are cognitively lazy, and therefore we take the easy route of saying, okay, this is what I think it is. Here is a data I look at it. This is what fits my case. And that is not proper critical thinking. And over a period of time, this grows and we become inflexible. How does it happen? This is how it happens. The various steps leading to cognitive inflexibility. That is our inability, our inflexibility and our inability to be able to see a certain point of view in a different light, or a certain situation with a different viewpoint. It all starts with a conclusion. I will take an example. Okay, it might or might not be an example which all of us agree with, but I hear it all the time saying, okay, we are going through a certain kind of economic problem as a country, and therefore we come back and say it's all the problem of the finance minister. All right, that's a conclusion. Have we analyzed the data? We don't know. Because of cognitive laziness, we don't even analyze the data, and we start with the conclusion, saying that the economic troubles of the country at this point in time is because of a certain ministry. Second, we go and randomly fit some data. We look at growth statistics or GDP statistics, and then come back and say, this is the reason why it is happening. And that's not careful analysis. It's a reverse, where we started with a conclusion, and now we can always find data to fit any hypothesis we want to fit. The third, it leads to a certain amount of intellectual laziness, because we can easily jump to conclusion, and jumping to conclusion needs no higher center. It can be easily a lower center activity, where it can just be reactive. As soon as we hear the name of somebody, we have an opinion whether it is likely to be good, whether it's something I'm going to agree, or whether it is bad and I'm going to disagree with that. That leads to intellectual laziness, which means we are not exercising our cognitive ability. As we get lazier and lazier and lazier, we get ourselves hardened with our views, and we sit inside a box. And we keep making friends in our WhatsApp group and react and put thumbs up to things which we agree with. What is that we are agreeing with? We never did the analysis in the first place, and therefore what we are agreeing with is also an unanalyzed form of information which is coming out. And as more and more like-minded people come in groups like this, what it creates is an echo chamber. An echo chamber is where we say something, the other person pretty much says what we said earlier, and we actually take it as two data points, and we say, this is what I'm always been thinking, and it reinforces our view to certain things. There was no additional data, but it still had the effect of reinforcing our wrong opinion and our wrong view to things. As these boxes harden, then we slowly lose our ability to think. And if we lose our ability to think, we simultaneously lose our ability to learn. And that makes us an inflexible, stubborn, intransigent person. And this is the attitude we start wearing. We see this in children. We see this in teenagers. I can at least empathize a little bit, because they don't have the worldly wisdom to do anything but whatever. But as adults, we do this every time, only that we might not do the shoulder hug and say the word whatever, but this happens all the time to all of us. And why is it important from a YogaKshema point of view? Because it stops us from evolving. As we get more and more inflexible, we talked about cognitive, emotional, and dispositional flexibility as being the core constructs of a good leader. And if we have cognitive inflexibility, then it stops us from evolving as an individual. Now, how do we reclaim this back? How do we reclaim this ability to think critically? There are 5 or 6 things we want to talk about in terms of how do we reclaim our wits? How do we reclaim our ability to think critically in this information overloaded world? The first of all of them, something I'm quite passionate about, is a concept called skepticism. Skepticism is a very old concept. The first thing I want to say about skepticism is not cynicism. Cynicism is looking at every situation in a pessimistic way. It is like if somebody says, this is the new policy which has been created by somebody, and we say, forget it. And these guys, they will never do anything properly. Or if somebody says this went well in my school, and say, oh, this principal, this one is like that. This management is, that is cynicism. Cynicism is a form of withdrawal. It's a form of reactive behavior. It's a form of pessimistic behavior towards anything which is being done or said. Skepticism is not even close to cynicism. Skepticism is a completely different concept. Skepticism is first and foremost a higher center activity because it's a willful activity. What is the will? It's the will to doubt. Anything which is being said or heard, we are able to effectively have an ability to subject it to critical thinking. We first doubt it. Doubt it not in a way that the person is lying, doubt it in a way saying that it is not yet fitted in. I need to get all the data and the right analysis so that I can fit it into a proper structure inside my cognition, inside my head, and I can store it away as knowledge or memory. And that calls for a will to doubt. Once we have the will to doubt, which is a cognitive process, then what we do is we subject everything we hear, everything we read, no matter which source it is coming from, whether it is from a trusted individual, whether it's from a trusted newspaper or a trusted television channel or whatever it is, the first thing is we doubt it, but we are open-minded about it. If you just doubt it and you're just pessimistic, that's cynicism. You start with saying, I will not accept yet what is being said till I can judge it for myself. I can critically examine it for myself and then make a decision whether to accept or to respond to it and say, this is not perfectly correct and my viewpoint is something else. Because it's a higher center activity, and we know that the higher center is an effortful thing. It's not the lower center, which is automatic. It's a higher center, which means it's effortful. Skepticism, therefore, is difficult to practice. Cynicism is not difficult to practice. Skepticism is difficult to practice because it's hard for us to be able to look at every situation, start with a doubt in the sense of non-acceptance, and then from non-acceptance to go towards collecting data, analyzing the data impartially, and then if it agrees with whatever analysis or disagrees with whatever analysis, we have the will at that point in time and the openness at that point in time to either accept it or reject the final conclusion. But there's a huge reward if you practice skepticism. And that huge reward is your thoughts are yours. You're not borrowing anybody else's thoughts. You're not parroting what somebody else has said, but you're saying things which you truly believe in. You have analyzed it and you're saying it from your mind. Reclaiming your wits. The second one is what is called a fear instinct. We saw in the session during automatic negative thoughts, we have a natural instinct to be conservative, to be fearful, because that's required for our survival. That is there as an innate quality in all of us. But what the television channels and the magazines know is that fear sells. And the TV channels know it much better than you and I do. Okay? Good news doesn't sell. Bad news sells. So when we watch news, we tend to get a much grimmer picture of the reality around us as compared to what it actually is. If I were to ask you this question, how many, there are two types of deaths which happen in the US. One is because of terrorism. Two is because of a drunk guy hitting somebody else, either a spouse or somebody else, and the person dying. People who die in category B is 50 times higher than category 1. Category 1 is terrorism. Category 2 is a drunk guy hitting anybody and then them dying, not just assault, dying. It's 50 times higher. All right. So, but terrorism sells because it creates a certain kind of primal fear in all of us. And the television channels know that, and they can paint a much grimmer picture. I'm not saying these problems don't exist in the world, don't get me wrong, but it's not as bad as what some of these magazines and books and television channels make it out to be. Every single propaganda in the world, starting from Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister of Adolf Hitler, every little propaganda is built on fear. You know what news is? News is to your brain what plain sugar is to your body. It does no good. Does that mean I stay away from news? Does that mean I switch off television channels? Does that mean I don't read magazines and newspapers and everything else? You don't. That's the recommendation. The recommendation is avoid all these emotion triggering news. If you really want to understand a bit more about the Indian economy, you really want to understand a lot more about farmer protest, if you really want to understand about demonetization or whatever else, if you want to understand about US elections, read long articles, go deep, avoid news. Because news only creates more fear and it triggers all the primal instincts in us and doesn't help us analyze or understand the situation any better. It is an enemy of critical thinking. This 24/7, every 10 minutes watching some news, it's just an enemy to critical thinking, effective critical thinking. If you really want to do proper critical thinking, read long articles. Look for articles which are at least 10 pages long and start reading them, analyze the data and look for articles which are more open in terms of the data and the presentation of it, analyze it for yourself and come to your own conclusions. The third, we are not going to be talking about all cognitive biases in our session, which we will do in Excel. But here I want to take one very important bias, which is called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where we interpret and analyze all new information in a way that it just fits in with our pre-existing viewpoint. Our conclusion doesn't change at all. Sometimes I've subjected myself to this kind of an exercise. If I come to a conclusion, then I go back and ask the question saying, what else could have happened for me to change my conclusion? If the answer to that is, I don't know, then chances are we are having a biased opinion. We selectively collect data that fit into our pre-existing opinion. We say things like, I agree, I disagree. Agree is nothing but it is just confirming to our previous viewpoint. That's all it means. we collect and look for evidences which support our pre-existing biases, pre-existing viewpoints, and actively reject things which disagree with us. It is particularly strong in emotionally charged situations. Like, I'm sure all of us would have come across this meme which says cataract is still the third largest cause for blindness. The first one and two being religion and politics. So in places where you have deeply entrenched beliefs, confirmation bias is likely to creep in. So look for places where you have strong beliefs and ask this, at least have the skepticism about yourself saying that I'm likely to be biased. Okay, self-skepticism is a very, very great tool for evolving as an individual. So doubt yourself as well. Is there something in my view which I need to change in my belief, in my values, in my morals and ethics and attitudes and everything else which I need to change? Look and talk to people who disagree with you. It's a bit energy sapping, but you will get a very profound and a much richer view to things. Okay, here is a little statement I put out there. Okay, I want you to write in the chat box whether you agree with this or not. That is, there's a 40% chance of convincing people if you support your argument with statistics. You can put it down quickly on the chat box whether you agree or disagree. Yeah. So you might be right. There are many people who are agreeing. You might be right, but this is fake news. I just embedded a statistic inside to make this argument sound smarter than what it is. It's completely fake. I created it. Okay, but I embedded a statistic like 40%, and that is how confirmation bias works. Okay, it doesn't work in a very obvious manner. It works in a fairly subliminal level. It's a far more insidious way in which it creeps in the confirmation bias. Right? The next, in terms of critical thinking, is in sociology, there is a concept called agency and a system. Agency is where we look for a person or a process which is responsible for everything which is happening. Like we talked about the economy and everything else, and we want to point it to some person. It is very difficult for us to accept and agree. If I were to say the problems of the economy is a far more complex thing. It is about our education system. It is about our skilling. It is about the COVID and the epidemic, which the pandemic, which is happening or happened. It is to do with our whole structure of our society. It's far more complex. It's much simpler for me to come back and say, that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she has to change and everything else will be sorted out. Because the human brain seeks out stories with clear characters and causality. I want to pin it to a character and I want to provide a reason. Whether it's logical, illogical is secondary. But I want to pin it to a character, I want to provide some cause, and then I want to insist on it. I want to sit in a box where everybody else agrees with me. I create the echo chamber. I create the hardening of my views. And finally, I become an inflexible person. But somewhere along the line, I feel very confident about it. What is there to feel confident about it? Because the data wasn't analyzed in the first place effectively. Reality is usually more complex. It's not complicated. Okay, reality is not complicated. It is complex. If we were to take the issue of our economy, it could be to do with spending. It could be to do with private enterprise not borrowing. It could be to do with the pandemic. It could be to do with the skill. It could be to do with our inability to start or wind up a company or an educational institute, whether an educational institute can be profit making or not. There's a whole set of things which happen simultaneously, and it's a system which is moving, which is an enormous thing. It's not complicated, it's complex. But complexity and understanding complexity is a cognitive process. But just to come back and point to some agency and say this person has to change and the world will be a better place is looking for agency and looking for a quick fix and looking for an answer which is intellectually lazy, cognitively lazy, and critical thinking wise, it is not critical thinking. So we need to resist the temptation to single out an agent and try and understand the system as is. It will be a tad confusing initially. It will be a bit difficult initially, but try and go through it because it will lead us to a much richer knowledge and a much richer understanding of the whole thing. Reclaiming our wits is the other one is getting misled by eloquence. Okay. Getting misled by eloquence is what? A lot of speakers, whether they are political speakers, political leaders, corporate leaders, religious, spiritual leaders, all of them have the gift of the gab. They are extremely eloquent people. They can express a thought process very, very clearly. I'm not saying what they're saying is a lie, but all I'm saying is sometimes we get carried away by the eloquence. We tend to believe the messenger than the message. It becomes very difficult for us to separate out the message from the messenger. When we start trusting a messenger, what we create is a halo effect around that particular messenger. And from there onwards, we are surrendering our critical thinking ability, and we have no longer an ability to understand and learn a message and form our own thoughts. An antidote for it, which I have seen work for me, is to take notes. In any meeting, no matter who it is, no matter how important, how reliable that particular, trustworthy that particular person is, take notes. If our notes are not filling up and there is no new knowledge we have written in our notes, chances are that meeting was just an exercise in eloquence. That's about it. There was nothing else which happened. Even when you listen to a lecture or something on YouTube, sit down and take down notes. When you listen to some of these political leaders or corporate leaders or spiritual leaders, sit down and take notes as to what is that they're saying. Try and put it down in a form of a structure. And if you're not able to fill up more than a 1/4 of an A4 sheet, then what did we hear? All these 45 minutes as to what happened there, there was not much which happened other than eloquence. After you take the notes, come to your conclusions, your thoughts, and your views. Okay. A general idea is not to be a fan or a follower. We can be a fan of a sports team, and that's about it. We can't be a fan of a person. We can't definitely not be a fan of a political leader. We can't be a fan of all these kinds of things because they are being mandated by the people to sit in a certain place. We have to suspend our critical thinking. Becoming a fan simply means that I am willing to suspend my critical thinking. Okay, I'm able to accept everything with what's at all. Okay, suspension of that is about being a fan or a follower. Be your own. And the last point, as far as reclaiming your wits is concerned, is willing to change our beliefs. If you go back a few sessions, we said belief is something what we take to be true. Whatever we think to be true is our belief. Are we willing to change that belief from time to time? Are we upgrading our beliefs? Are we willing to give up old beliefs? And giving up old beliefs is not a sign of weakness. I'm not saying we have to do it in a fickle-minded way, but not giving up our beliefs is a type of stubbornness. It is intransigence by definition. Giving up our belief is not a weakness. In fact, it's a strength. Evolving is about being able to move to a newer and a higher truth. Constantly updating ourselves, constantly moving to a newer and a higher truth, newer and higher understanding, and getting to a higher level of understanding of that particular belief is really what evolving is all about. When we evolve, the old person in us starts dying. That's good. That's good. That's the way nature works. Old things have to die, and new things, new green shoots have to take life. And that's why one of these lines by this writer, Hugh Prather, in a book called Notes to Myself, I remember this line from when I was 20 years old. It says, next time I will, from now on I will. What makes me think I'm smarter today than I will be tomorrow? What makes me think I was smarter yesterday as compared to what I will be today? It is our ability to have that flexibility, not fickle mindedness, not for the wrong reasons, not in an immoral way, but in a cognitively flexible manner. Am I able to change some of those things? Right? That's where I want to summarize, which is reclaiming our critical thinking is about having the will to doubt, a cognitive will to doubt, staying away from fear feeders. It could be social media, it could be television, it could be a magazine or whatever it is. If something is saying in a sense that creates fear or mistrust, avoid it. Read a long article if you really want to understand something. Be very, very watchful of confirmation bias, because confirmation bias is the mother of all biases and all of us have it. Don't try to jump to a conclusion and pin agency and say that is the person because of which all this is a problem. And as soon as I change that, everything else will sort itself out. You know what? They won't. Because most problems are systemic. They are not agency. There will be people who have greater agency. There might be situations where we have to change people, but most problems are systemic in nature. Trust the message, not the messenger. Otherwise, you'll get yourself trapped in having a halo and start believing everybody. And after that, you start believing a person than the message which is being said by that particular person. And have the open-mindedness, have that flexibility to change your beliefs when we need to upgrade our beliefs. There is no great glory in sticking to our old beliefs and being stubborn. I'm going to ask you this one question. You can put it in the chat box. The person in this picture went on to become the captain of the Indian cricket team. Your question is, what's the name of the person? Saurav Ganguly. Not a correct answer, but a very common answer. Okay, can you just put a few more? Ravi Shastri, not a bad one. Yeah, not true. No, not really. Anil Kumble, Dhoni. Okay, good. See, that is how our biases slowly creep in without us even knowing. The person in this picture went on to become the captain of the Indian cricket team, and guessed the name of that particular person. And somebody says, girl, Jarna, thank you. The person is Mithali Raj. You see how it creeps in. The moment we show a boy and a girl and say the person went on to be the captain of the Indian cricket team, we forget that it might be the girl, because we choose the question we want to hear. We don't listen to the question which is being asked at all. Okay, this is not an exercise to say, look, I told you so, but for us to just open our mind and understand this is how these things work. Okay, an absolute legend in Indian cricket is this lady by name Mithali Raj, who happened to score 10,000 runs, the second person ever in the history of the world to score 10,000 runs. She scored it yesterday, by the way. And that is Mithali Raj in that particular picture, the captain of the Indian cricket team sometime back. Now it's Harmanpreet. All right. And well, that's all that is there to it. In the last slide, I'm not going to read it out. If you have the time, please read it. This is one of the things I really have loved for a very long period of time. It's a line by Bertrand Russell. When he talks about when you want to study a philosopher, I'll just quickly summarize it. When you want to study a philosopher, but you can change philosopher to if you want to study anything, he says, don't have reverence or contempt. Okay, start with some kind of a sympathetic understanding of what is that person trying to say, and then leave all of that aside and put on your critical thinking cap and carefully analyze what is that they are saying. For us to be able to have the sympathy in terms of what is that they are trying to say, contempt comes in the way of that. And reverence comes in the way of careful analysis. So we have to hold the middle ground, which is neither contempt nor reverence. But we have to find the middle ground, which is somewhere between contempt and reverence, and say, what is that they are trying to say? And actually, honestly, make an effort to understand what is that they are trying to say. And then critically examine it and think for ourselves what is being said, and finally decide whether we agree with it or not agree with it. All right. Yeah, that's about it. I think I've kind of slightly overshot. Honestly, critical thinking is a topic I can talk for like 10 hours, but yeah, to put it down in 30 minutes was hard work, but I've still sort of managed to do it, I think. Yeah, I've slightly overshot that time. Thank you.
Yeah. Ramesh?
Yes, Andy.
I just want to add value add to this. In fact, I wanted to start off saying you can speak on the subject for 2 days. You did it in minutes. I enjoyed every minute of it. One of these days, we want to hear 2 days of your talk or discussion on this subject. But I want to, while listening to you about claiming your wits, and then especially about changing your beliefs, and also talking about surrendering, this came to my mind, and then I want to share this with everybody. It's not about surrendering to somebody or a person, anything, but neuroscientifically speaking, it is about surrendering to the moment. Surrendering to the present moment, which means you're surrendering to yourself. And that is where the power lies, when you surrender yourself to the present moment, to be able to be thinking in a critical manner, using your critical thinking skills, using your metacognition skills. So maybe this should be another way of putting our YogaKshema concept, Ramesh, to be able to say, surrender to the moment, surrender to yourself, and use that power of the moment, here and now and here, using critical thinking skills to be able to conquer that moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So wonderful. So thank you. Thank you for the time and the patience shown. We will now move to the case. If there are any questions, we are happy to handle it here or at the end of the session. Both are okay. Otherwise, Shubha has volunteered today to present a case, which is it's a fairly large and a complex case, but you know it's not directly linked to the subject matter which we discussed today, but something which is if we can abstract it out, something we